is July 12th, and this interview with Joel Parris. All right, so let's start with just quick mini bio. Why did you go to law school?
Lack of alternatives. That sounds like one of my clients. I think I got out of undergrad about 1988 and went to D.C. with a girlfriend, and she was doing an internship, and I went back there with great plans to work. I had 100 copies of a resume on linen paper and a three-piece suit, and found out that most of the people inside of the Beltway really didn't know where Arizona was, and asked me things about my horses and what I like to shoot and things like that. And I never got a job, so I came home and applied to law school. It was like that. I thought I'd be a real estate lawyer. I'd worked in real estate, and I didn't like real estate, but I thought the lawyers had an elevated lifestyle, and so I was headed that way. And then I got rejected from law school. So, sorry, you can't come here. And so I left and went to Central America, and that was about a month and a half after Hurricane Jane in Nicaragua, and it was a tough place to be, and came home gaunt, sick, exhausted, and there was a phone message saying a couple people decided not to go and you're on the waiting list. I don't know if you want to hear this story.
This is a good story. Yeah.
Maybe we should cut this out.
No, it's great.
A real story
this is
here.
Good.
Yeah.
And other people are doing real stories too. This is real. This is all about realness. This isn't fluff.
Well, so I said, sure, I want to go to law school. And I called and I said, please put me on the waiting list. And somebody said, you're on the waiting list, but really you ought to continue with your life because the waiting list is, you're down there on the waiting list. And so one day I was out there beating the pavement looking for a job, and I was playing pool in a tavern on Grant Road, and I think a angry, unemployed plumber, some guy, I can't remember, he was talking to me, and I slipped in there that I had applied to law school and been rejected, and he asked me my name, and I wrote it on a napkin, and he talked to someone who works here and as a clerk or a clerical assistant in an office, who pulled my application up, and for some reason I made the waiting list. So like 4 days before law school they said, do you want to go? You know what they say about the last one admitted? And
what do they say about the last
gets
one?
out too, right.
And that's right.
So that's how I went to law school. I really had different plans for my life than what I do now.
What do you think, what would you have done?
Well, at that time I thought, well, gee, I have all this experience working in construction and real estate and mining claims, and I was going to go into land acquisitions for mining corporations. It sounded good, like a lot of things do before you go to college. And in college, in law school, I think I didn't like my property class very much, and I went to a few interviews after second year and didn't like those people in the firm interviews very much. And after second year I worked for a big law firm. Do you want me to name names?
Sure. Whatever you want.
Well, it doesn't matter. It's not here. It's Macano Valdez. It's the largest law firm in Puerto Rico, and I worked there as a summer associate, which means that they grind every ounce of juice out of you and decide whether they want to do that for you permanently. And I didn't like it. They offered me a job, and I said I'd rather go home, and I did. And so I was kind of disillusioned my third year, and I started going back to where I had come from. As a teenager, I was probably a leftist rabble-rouser, what would Andy Silverman say, a civic-minded activist. And so third year I started working with homeless people, indigents more, and became interested in public law. So I went out and applied as a public defender. And that's what I do.
How would you define public law to someone who didn't know what that was?
Oh, it's, I always think of a factory. I think there was a professor here, Henderson, who used to say to me, if you like sausage, you don't go to the factory. And I thought that was kind of eccentric, but not a day goes by when I don't hear those words. Public law is all that in the public courts, and in my sense it's public criminal justice law. I'm a defender, and then there's the prosecutors, but I'm sure that there's, separate parallel universes of all the people who do other types of public law, right away or whatever kind of administrative law, habeas corpus and things. What I do is criminal. And specifically what I do is federal criminal, which is mostly borderline jurisdiction, which means illegal aliens and drug interdiction. And so
how did you get to there? Did you like criminal procedure, or did you?
I like David Wexler a lot. I can't say I care for the rules as they've evolved in our criminal courts, but you won't find many prosecutors that like them either. They are what they are. I felt like by my third year of law that was where I needed to go, where I could be a real lawyer. That rather than, golly, try to keep the four-letter words out of this, rather than working for money, to work for something I believed in. And I'm not sure that's a good value to put all your stock in. In other words, now that I'm 40-something, I am a little more interested in finances than I was at 20-something. But that's the way life goes.
All right, I have a couple questions before we get to what you're doing now.
Yeah.
What didn't you like about being in Puerto Rico as a summer associate? Can you go into a little bit more detail?
I just didn't like the law firm environment. I didn't like the clients. Every single client that walked through that door was wearing an Armani suit, and they all had the same yellow tie with blue polka dots. It was that year, and I felt like a clone. I felt like a busboy. It's not too much shucking and jiving and smoking mirrors and not enough people saying what they really mean, and then there's the other thing too, the little exposure of working for major American corporations who hire a law firm to basically union busting, labor law, how to keep wages down, how to keep benefits away from the workers. I'm ambivalent about a lot of social theory that I was pretty sure about 10 or 15 years ago, but I, at that time, had a lot of internal dissonance working for those people. And I think that's probably true of any line of law you go into. So I don't know that it's unique to my experience, but that was my objection to the law firm life. And then there was this expectation that you would cut your hair the same way everybody else did, little comments that perhaps I wanted to join the club, the country club, and I wasn't interested, which made me less of a company player. There were things like that. Why do you drive this cheap car? Don't you know that one of our finance people can put you in a brand new Lexus? And I just didn't fit in. I like a Lexus, I just don't fit in one.
So do you think that the kind of law that you practice inherently, it dictates what value system or I mean, how do you...
I think that...
Does that make sense? I mean,
yes, it does.
Which comes first, or, I mean, do you gravitate to, like...
I think I'm honest when I say that I went to law school in part because I wanted a job with a decent income. When I first started thinking about law school, I had ideas of social justice in my mind. By the time I got here, I'm surrounded by a lot of people who were simply ambitious. And I think that by my second year of law school, I was ambitious but pretty insecure about my qualifications. First year of law school, I closed the library every night of the week and I got B's. Second year of law school, I went to happy hour 3 or 4 nights a week and studied average and got B's. And so I just figured I'm a B person. I am, maybe. But back to the point, I think that definitely your values drive where you go, don't they? Every day. But your values change, and I think every defender, cop, prosecutor I talk to will tell you that it ain't what I thought it was when you get into the system. You know, you're looking back on it, like, geez, whew, you know. I mean, all the time I'm telling my clients, sorry, you saw that on TV, that's not the way the courts really work, but I'm there. And I think your values, I think you also do, the second part of your question, or I think, is do you become what you work for? And I think that's definitely true, in the sense that we all, as human beings, try to adjust, you know, we're chameleons or whatever, we try to fit in, and you know, you move to the East Coast, you're going to start doing different things, and if you go hang out with a bunch of lawyers, no matter what kind of lawyers that they are, you're going to adopt some of their persona or values, and this is one of the dangers I've recently noticed, that, you know, I think every lawyer runs the risk of becoming a lawyer. And, you know, you go home, and if you're still a lawyer, when you go home, you've got problems. And so maybe you go home and you try not to be a lawyer with your family, but you're still thinking like a lawyer. You're still thinking about, you know, I mean, like these driven type A lawyers, we're all, you know, wake up in the middle of the night, take a shower, and try to break a case, you know, and that invasion of your subconscious just messes things up, you know. It doesn't leave time for you to think about higher values in terms of spirituality, financial well-being, physical health, hanging out with people that really matter, those kind of things.
So how do you keep that from happening?
Well, me personally now, I'm diligent about, I could give you an easy answer. I could say have a baby, and then it's easier to go home. 3 years ago I had a baby, and before that I was probably working 60, 70 hours a week, and now I'm down to 45, I think, and that was an easy transition when you got a baby at home. So that's an easy answer. For other people, I think that, I mean, not to wear out the Lexus metaphor, but but I just talked to a guy the other day. You know, he's got this brand new BMW Z3. It's $45,000 or whatever, and you know, and he says to me, "I think I got buyer's remorse." It's like 3 weeks later, it's gone down 20% in value. I still got it. I love it and everything, but I really shouldn't have. And once we talk about, why did you do this? Well, being a lawyer is stressful, and golly, I ought to be able to unwind in traffic. You know, feel good. Well, it's whatever. BMW Z3, heroin. Whatever, everybody's got these things, but I think that then you look within and say, what can I do to really balance my life? For me, I have found that, you know, physical exercise is hard to plan in, so I try to ride my bike to work. I find that...
Oh, wait, stop. So if you ride your bike to work, how do you like have stuff closed, or like,
oh, yeah.
like how do you do that? Like if you're gonna ride your bike to work,
So
how do you
all
do
my
it?
jackets hanging there in the office, and I'm trying to transition into this to where I can, you know, like real lawyers, have the dry cleaners pick up all my clothes and drop them off at the office. That would be good. And you know, the fun thing about it is I ride out of my office in my cutoffs and down the street on a t-shirt, and I go right by the judges. They have no idea who I am. The prosecutors, they just, it's kind of like, you're not wearing a suit and tie, you're not one of us, and you're standing right next to them at a stoplight or something, and they just gotta look right through you. It's bizarre.
You become invisible.
Yeah, and I really like that. But you know, I mean, I think you gotta have like physical exercise, and you can't forget it. I mean, it's so easy to work all day and all night, you know, if you don't have kids, or if you suck into this thing that, you know, I've got to make it to the top of my firm or whatever. I have learned that some of my clients are going to get burned no matter what I do, and quite a few of them will destroy themselves no matter what I do. And and there's this adage in criminal law that like the real, to use a metaphor, euphemism, jerks, the real jerks get the breaks. It's true, because the prosecution and the police bend the rules to get at the real jerks, and so that's where the judges tend to draw the lines. That can set up a lot of dissonance in your brain too, when you see your really worthy clients just get ramrodded and the real jerks suddenly get let go. A lot of this I've learned, I just had learned to go like, you know what, you got to accept that, you know. Before I went to law school, I was thinking I wanted to be a doctor, right? And I'm like, well, let's go to law. And I went to an internship at the hospital, and I kept thinking like, you know, years of being around all this blood and damage and crying and stuff, that's got to take a toll on your soul. And I didn't really do the same calculus with lawyering, you know. There are not many happy people in courts, you know. They don't sue for fun. They don't get prosecuted. Nobody enjoys that, you know. So there's a lot of negativity.
How do you deal with it?
Well, I mean, one is to try to remember that that is not me. That there's a heart and soul, and that I have other things going on. I deal with it, and how does, I mean, without getting into like religion, how does a person maintain a state of mind? How do you keep your karma up? I find little tricks, you know. I'll draw a note on my hand. I'll put a picture of my kid in my brief. I'll carry books. I go to the library once a week and I check out books. I keep diversifying my brain. And so I go to court carrying a book on gardening, edible food plants of the Sonoran Desert, molding and trim, cement work. You know, I go to the used bookstores and get old high-tech concrete magazines and whatever, gardening magazines, and it keeps me aware that when I walk out of that court, there's a real world, and you can't just ignore it for 40 years and then say I had a successful career. You really gotta have some love in your life, you know, instead of just fight. And you gotta have some love in the fight too. So I try to inject some humor into my work at court. Everybody falls asleep in the court, you know. You see the judges going like this, you know, because they're just out of it. And sorry, no judge in particular, but and so, you know, sometimes I'll walk up there and say, no, I have nothing to say, but, and then, you know, or I'll use the word ain't a few times or whatever, something to get their attention. That helps me try to feel like, you know, why don't we all have court in the park today? You know, why don't we do something different here? Can anybody laugh in this room? Is anybody listening? Is anybody awake? And if you just kind of keep pushing not the legal issues only, but also people's tickle buttons or whatever, then I think that the practice itself can be less tedious, less of a grind on your brain and your heart. But then the other thing is that after a while, people get to know you as someone who's interested in other things, and they say, you know, gee, I know you were interested in gem and minerals, and so they start conversations about that, and it keeps this acidity level down in court, you know. When you see another lawyer, do you only relate to them on the basis of, I hate the briefs that you write, or do you see them on the basis of, I know this person and their kids and whatever, and we can fight about it and still be friends. That's what I'm really working hard to keep in my practice.
So, let's say I'm a student and I'm shy and I have no idea how to not talk about anything but the law. Like, how do you get people to know that you're interested in gems or talk about other things? That's
my trick with the books. If you go walk into court, everybody's got a briefcase, or I don't. Sometimes I'll carry a cardboard box, you know, but everybody carries the same manila envelopes with the little labels on it and everything else. And if you happen to have a magazine on top that says canoe and kayaking, somebody will notice. And I like to talk about canoes and kayaking. a lot. So it comes up. And I think, like there's a lawyer in my office who, it's funny, I watch the difference in styles where I sit down with the client and go like, this is what you charge, this is what the max is, this is when your next court is, this is how it's going to happen, that's the prosecutor, let me tell you about him, this is how this works, And I watch her every day. I walk in and she says, oh, where are you from? Oh, I'm from Obergone. Oh, gee, do you have family there? How many kids do you have? Oh, yeah, and your wife, does she work? And there's just like kind of this, I'm going, what? But she is a great lawyer, And so now I start to try to meet people on this different plane too, my clients and the lawyers as well. And it's just something that,
Mm-hmm.
that, the fact is that, to quote someone we all admire, there's no point chanting. So I don't want to waste my time arguing a legal point with the prosecutor when I can just brief it, hand him the brief, he briefs it, hands it to me. Did you read my brief? Yeah. Did you go fishing last week? Yeah, I did. And everything works out a lot better. You're never going to convince the other side to agree with you, really. I mean, to get paid to do something else. So.
Okay, before we move on, what do you write on your hand? Or do you not want to say?
Whatever. I little things. It's funny. At one point, I realized that maybe it helps you bond with clients that have tattoos, but which maybe include everybody now, not just clients. But I'll write what time I'm meant to be at my next court if I am stressed. But I'll also write something like zoo to remind me that I'll be at the zoo in a few hours. I might, and this is something you can't relate to, but maybe when you're 40, I write the name of my dear friend Jim, who died in an accident a couple of years ago, who was full of life, who went to this law school. And things like that inspire me. I have a picture on my wall in my office that people ask me if it's not my wife, and I tell them, no, it's Tony Mazzaro. She's the dean of the law school. She's a really cool person. And they don't understand. Well, is this like some kind of like worship thing? Maybe, but really it's just to remind me. Little things to remind me.
What does the picture of Dean Mazzaro remind you? Why
Reminds me of Dean Mazzaro and the things she told me.
When you were
Only
here?
class I got a C in law school, but it was my favorite one. The things she told me, we could go on for hours. She told you too. You took the class,
All right, let me see.
So I do these things to balance. You have to have. You have to schedule stuff in. I mean, it's one of the problems being a lawyer. You get real busy. And so I've got this thing of like, what am I doing for the next 4 Fridays? Boom, 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 boom. Lock it in, Then I got, Fridays are going to be swimming at the pool, the picnic. And on Wednesday nights I do this radio show that I mentioned to you. And those are things that I love doing. And they're on a weekly basis, so they're programmed in. Because if they're not, they don't happen.
Can you do that stuff? You said that you used to work 70 hours, now you work 45. Can you do that when you first start out? Could you have to have those few years where you just work like crazy hours, or can you always have the quality of life that you have now?
Well, can you? We all have choices, and I talked to a person the other day who says, no one should be a slave to a job. You should work when you want to, whatever. I mean, philosophies will range on that. If you go to work for a firm, they're going to expect a lot. And if you go to work for a firm, or most organizations, be they governmental or administrative, there's going to be enough people there that there's a competitive atmosphere. And so, unfortunately, the psyche of the psych profile of law students would probably mean that most people are susceptible to self-initiated obsessive behavior. And that's, so can you? Yes, sure. Anybody can go to work. I had 2 friends, my 2 study buddies, went off to work for the same firm in Century City, California, okay? One of my study buddies was, of course, kind of obsessive. The guy whose outline was as long as the book all the time. He carried his laptop everywhere. And the other guy was pretty mellow. we were the two guys that drank margaritas while everybody was writing on the law review, and so these two guys go off to work for the Century City firm, and one guy's determined, I am going to work 40, maybe 50 hours a week because I'm having a life. This is LA. I moved over here because I wanted to live in the city. And the other guy is saying, like, I'm getting to the top of this firm no matter how many people I have to step on. So for 3 years in a row, Mr. Obsessive gets the award for the most billable hours in the junior sector or whatever. And the other guy keeps calling me and saying, like, I'm so sick of people saying, why can't you be like, aren't you from Arizona? Aren't you from the same school or whatever? Well, he's gone now. He went to Phoenix and he works in a little small practice, and he's very happy and very mellow from what I can see. The other guy is over in Century City and works his butt off and seems happy. He's like donating venture capital for major Pacific Rim, movie corporations or whatever. He's made it. He's where he wants to be. So I just say to each their own. I think you can limit it.
So it's a
But you need to like kind of predict these things when you go to work for a firm and you go like, gee, do you work your people to the bone? What are they going to say?
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, of course not.
Right.
But you need that's why I think everybody ought to do internships. Everybody, instead of hanging out here third year or whatever, get out and just go hang out with lawyers and see what they're doing. Give them a little truth serum and listen to their stories. They'll tell you what it's like, because it's not how they tell you in the interview.
All right. I think we might have to, because I don't want to run out of time, and we have a lot to talk about. Talk about sort of what you do. So your clients and your daily and
Sure.
what you do. So why don't we start with what do you do? Where are you and what do you do?
I'm a federal public defender, and that means that I represent indigent defendants in federal court, which most are, and they are charged with federal offenses, which comes under jurisdiction typically if you're arrested by a federal agent or if you're arrested on the border. And of course, being a border state, drugs and immigration, and maybe once in a year some kind of violent crime, or twice a year some kind of mail fraud or something like that. But the bulk of my work is defending drug charges and illegal reentry, for which the penalty is now a max 20 years, and a majority of clients get somewhere between 3 and 5 years in prison, which is kind of wild, but we have thousands of people in our prisons here doing that time. So I represent them, those people, mostly Mexican nationals, because of this country's drug system, which, consider the whole thing that alcohol and tobacco are illegal, and pharmaceuticals are out of control, and marijuana is untaxed and a huge sector of our economy, and most of the people who are arrested and thrown in jail are poor Mexican folks that their village has been burned down or gone into drought, and they have no job, or they they get to the border and they want to work in one of these border factories that was supposed to be created by NAFTA, but of course they don't really exist, and the ones that are there are really abusive to their workers, and so they're on the streets where probably, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say, probably 100 times a day someone in Nogales, Sonora is being told, hey buddy, I know you're down on the luck, you want to drive this car, I'll give you $100. Just take it across the border and park it at Bausch's, park it at APCO, whatever. And so I represent those people, the indigents, because there are a relatively very minor number of people that are arrested that are big drug dealers. Just doesn't happen a lot. And they usually don't get public defenders. But that's who I represent.
Do you speak fluent Spanish?
Yes.
Should you speak fluent Spanish to do that?
To be a federal defender, about 9 out of 10 of our attorneys need to. We have a couple of attorneys in an office of 20 some odd that don't speak Spanish fluently, and they primarily handle our English-speaking clients. So they'll get cases off the reservation will get turned federal under the Major Indian Crimes Act, and then they'll get a few white-collar cases. Mail fraud's big these days. Felon in possession after Waco, felon in possession was really big. We had quite a few English-speaking clients when the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms and the FBI really wanted to create some statistics to improve their image, and so they had Operation Trigger Lock, and they went through like Pima County Jail and all the state DOC facilities and said, everybody who had violated their parole or probation by being in possession of a firearm, you come in with us, you've already admitted in state court that you possess this weapon, and so now you're in federal court and as a federal felon in possession charge, facing whatever up to 10 years, and so that went on for a few years. So we do have work for English-speaking clients. Now there seems to be right now an awful lot of prosecution of mail fraud, which includes a whole lot of things. And people like sending out their like get-rich-quick schemes, especially oriented towards the old folks in the retirement communities. Those are unfortunately increasing crimes in our society with all the access to internet information and things, credit card fraud, check kiting, bank false statement fraud. We get English-speaking clients.
So when someone, so you have you have someone that is down the luck, they're in Mexico, they ask to be driven across the border and they get caught. Is that, can you explain take an example of a client, like what happens and where are you involved with them and sort of what do you do and when do you see them and when do you find out that, do you know what I mean, like what
How
happens?
the process goes?
Yeah.
Well, federal litigation is similar to anything else. You have an arrest, a detention hearing, then you have arraignment where they present the indictment, and then you'll have a motion hearing, and then maybe a couple other delays, and then a trial. Very, very few of our cases go to trial. And this is a function of two things. There's evidence and guilt in a large majority of cases, and there's a higher sanction to be faced if you don't plead guilty. Although, and this has been litigated, and I hesitate to say something that would offend somebody on the court. Supposedly you have a right to trial in this country, but sentencing guidelines will say that the person who accepts responsibility and pleads it beforehand is worthy of a lower sentence. And that's, comes under the rubric of all this judicial economy and that kind of thing. Unfortunately, what I end up telling my clients all the time is, geez, I really don't, my job is not truth or falsehood. That's for the judge. Guilt and innocence, good and bad, I don't really deal with that. I evaluate the evidence. I think you have a fighting chance here, and if you take that fighting chance, your sentence will probably be here. But if you just cop out and plead, you'll be down here. So then it becomes a mixture of does the defendant have an insistence that they want to fight for innocence? Do they have an attitude? Do they have, and a lot of them have a self-defeating attitude. There are a lot of people in federal prison who say, I don't care what my sentence is. I don't have anyone, I don't have a home, I don't have any food. At least here, I get to watch TV and there's no rain, So, you know what I'm saying? This decision to go to trial is seldom made in federal court. But I get to meet these people at the detention hearing. Very few people in federal court will get out on detention, primarily because they're foreign nationals, the majority of my clients. And so they get detained, and that's another thing too. Do you want to stay in a detention facility filled with all kinds of different people? The pods aren't segregated, it's a tough atmosphere. Do you want to stay there for another 60, 90 days while we litigate your case, or would you like to plead guilty now and get off somewhere where you can be in a what they call a classified prison system? Either you're a low security prisoner, a drug offense, maybe you go to a prison that's a much easier atmosphere than a place where multiple murderers go. And in a detention facility, they're pretty much all in there together, including now we have the corporate detention facilities for sale, for rent. Yes, the United States is the largest prison population in the world. Per capita, we're 4 times higher than anyone else. And the new trend is to rent facilities from corporations like CCA, which don't have as much scrutiny from the courts. So a recent article that I pulled up off the internet from a Hawaiian newspaper about they send their clients over to this prison in Florence, that way I have my prisoners in, and they're investigating the fact that their gang prisoners are having free access to female INS detainees. In other words, a sex ring inside the prison. The prison warden out there, the ex-warden I should say, is quoted as saying he spoke to a guard who admitted to him that he was smuggling drugs into the prison because he was afraid of the prisoners. It is not a happy place. And so there's a lot of pressure to plead guilty from that too. So I meet these people, and most of the time I say, okay, we'll plead guilty and try to get the best sentence we can. That's an unfortunate part of my job that I want students to know. If they think, oh yeah, I'm going to go to trial every day. Trials are people's lives. And when you come right down to it, I don't like just pleading people guilty out fast, but when you look at the collateral factors, it's better for these people, than to stay in that detention facility and risk dying or whatever for another 3 months while they wait to go to trial, take a shot at it. So.
Are the people are they scared? Do you have clients at all different levels? I mean.
Sure. I had a woman in my office today who I have spent probably 15 hours trying to explain the case to, and she's just so mortified that she doesn't get it. Circles, narrows, graphs, everything. I have other clients who know the legal system quite well, who want to write their own briefs. They usually have a little bizarre theories on the law, but and then I have the largest percentage of my clients just really don't understand. God said, so this guy stood up in court and the judge said, no, you understand you have this right and that right, and he says, I understand you say that, you're just saying that, it doesn't mean anything to us. And that, I think, speaks for a lot of my clients. What does it mean, to have a right to go to trial? What does it mean to have a right to have a defense? If your defense attorney doesn't have a right to get the information, the access to, in the federal court we can't interview the police officers that arrested your client. You don't get access to the reports. You can't, and a lot of this stuff, it's an unequal playing field. So, but yeah, I have clients on all different levels. I have dozens of clients who come from southern Mexico who come into the country. They're doing some yard work in Green Valley. They get deported a couple times, and then they come back in. They're charged with a re-entry where they're going to get 3, 4, 5 years, and but they're going like, I don't have the money to get back down to my home in the southern part of Mexico. I don't know how to get there, so I'm like stuck on the border, and I got choices. I can try to eat out of dumpsters in Nogales, Sonora, where there's not much, or I can jump back across the border and try to get something going here, and that's a much better bet for them. And if I landed in prison, well, at least I didn't starve to death.
That's a pretty dismal picture that
Yeah,
you
isn't
paint. Yeah.
Well, but you see, I prefer that dismal picture to working for people who are saying, what, these employees are really getting on my case, and I want that union taken apart, or, what, our customers, we need to figure out how to get another 25 cents off every dollar, or whatever. I prefer it. It's sad, but I think that this is, but that's why I'm there, right? 10 years ago I was an angry young man, younger, and now I'm not so angry, not so young, and I think that's good. So now I probably have more potential for the next 5 or 10 years in my profession than I did back then. If I had continued to burn twice as bright, you know what I'm saying?
No, what do you mean? The twice? I don't understand.
The candle that burns twice
yeah,
as bright burns out. Yeah, it's just. And I think most people probably go through that really gung-ho phase, no matter what new thing they get into. Relationships are like that, a new car is like that, anything is like that. But I think it's a hazard that law students ought to know, so I put it out. What does it feel like to deal with somebody who's been deported to Mexico? 5, 10 times a year I deal with this client who says, when I was 2, my parents moved to LA. I'm Mexican, yep. My parents, when I was 5, Dad was beating on Mom or whatever, they got divorced. I lived with one of them. By the time I was 13, I was having trouble in school, hanging out with the homies, picked up an assault conviction for a fight, maybe got picked up for a couple of joints on the street, got a marijuana conviction. Ooh, that's an aggravated felony now. You get deported to Mexico, you know? I mean, you know what's worse than being a gringo in Mexico with no money? Being a Chicano in Mexico with no money. You got Mexican pride tattooed on your hand, and these guys will work you over because they can't speak Spanish. I'm representing a half dozen times a year guys that I walk in and start speaking Spanish to them, and they go like, wait, I'm from LA. Yeah, I'm Mexican. But the same trajectory, I mean, that happens all the time, millions of people. And, you know, I can't say they're like somebody I want my little sister to go out. They grew up on the streets of East LA, but they're...
But they're caught between these two worlds.
Yeah, I mean, what do you do with a guy when, he gets deported to Mexico after, a lot of them, and now we find out about Rampart, but that's a whole other subject, but so the guy gets deported to Mexico after having 2 or 3 joints. What was the sentence for the 2 or 3 joints? Probation. And what does he get? Deported. So he does like a week in jail and he's deported to Mexico, where he has no family, no friends, can't get a job, doesn't speak the language, and he's getting abused. What are they going to do? What would you do? And I tell you, what would you do? Oh, everybody has to make their own decisions, mister, and you came back in this country, the sentence is 63 months or whatever,
But at least you're back. I mean, you're back. You're not in Mexico.
Yeah, back in prison.
Right.
So a lot of those guys, that's a lot of the guys that are in prison now. They get long sentences, and because they have a prior conviction for drugs or violence, and that's harsh. It's harsh. And what I'm saying is, what we're talking about here is harsh stories about people, but I'm saying it's harsh on a lawyer to deal with that every day. Go home. Honey, what'd you do at work today? God, you don't want to know. I pled some poor guy guilty, and he's going to jail for this amount of time, and tried to get him a lower sentence, and it didn't really work. I mean, we got guidelines now, and your sentence is like in the grid work, and really, what are you going to do? I mean, what's your defense? If illegal reentry, if you're not an American citizen or you don't have a passport, you're not going to trial. It's shooting fish in a barrel. So we fill up these prisons, and I believe that this country ought to have control of its borders, and I think, I don't know, some days they vacillate, open the doors, other days they say, like, build a great wall, but either way, in the process of this war on immigrants, war on illegal immigrants, there are a lot of people getting hurt, because, a lot of these guys I'm talking about that speak English, that get deported down there, and they're going like, I can't even get a job bussing tables down there. And I was a truck driver for $80,000 a year in Pasadena. And I got 4 kids in high school, just about to go to college. Where are they going? Mom just lost the house. They're out on the streets. So, there's a mushrooming of this collateral damage. And then what? Mom is out of the house, on the streets, on welfare. And then what? No dad figure in the house? Where's the kid? Hanging out on the streets. America's future prisoners. That's sad.
Okay, so is there anything happy?
Oh, yeah.
Is there any good happy stories? Because this is really depressing.
Yeah, I work with good people.
I
would jump in front of a train for everybody in my office. And that's a good feeling, to know that I like these people. I like them a lot, my associates. I like my boss. He's a good guy, really good guy, heart of gold. And that's why I'm there, see, because I think that's why I went to law school, I got out of high school, I bust tables, I would do construction work, I was real estate and all this stuff, and I was always working for people I didn't like, and now at least I'm around people I like. I even like a lot of the prosecutors. Don't publicize that, but, we're, there are decent people where I work, and I care a lot about that. And the pay is good. Can't complain about that. So.
Do you think there's this sort of thing that we're gonna talk to the Career Center people tomorrow about sort of all the different things and where you go and money and all of that. But Can you have a good life and not be a corporate lawyer? I mean, I know that sounds like a dumb question, but like if you're a law student and it's all about money and like you see that value system.
I have several friends who walked out and hung their own shingle, which takes a lot of guts and a lot of hard work, and I think that they're pretty happy, although a lot of them I think are working way too hard. See marriages fall apart, things like that, alcohol, whatever the symptoms are of being too stressed. Is it possible to work? Yeah, sure. It's free. There's a lot of. I mean, for example, my job. I'm not torn up. I got blood on my hands, but I wash it off. I had, what I didn't know before about the medical profession is that doctors deal with that. They're not traumatized by the smell of antiseptic and the sight of blood anymore because it's just the work environment, and they pass it off. And I go home after extremely bad days and have a nice time, and that's why lawyers get paid a lot, is because it's a frictive, fairly negative profession, and we recognize that. The state bar talks like a public relations organization. Lawyers talk about it among themselves, and I think everybody that's being aware of the problem is the first step. And I think that a lot of lawyers out there are seeking to decrease the negativity in their job. I mean, we have an adversarial system, and that's a necessary component of the truth-finding role of the courts. But it doesn't mean you have to be in fight mode all the time. Something else that I learned in class here a lot of times is that information is better received by people who are not feeling pushed or threatened. And so, yeah, I think it's fine. I think a lot of people have great lives. I think the lawyers in my office have decent lives. I think it's an issue, But golly, when I used to work in construction, getting run over by a front-end loader was an issue. And when I surveyed, standing in the middle of the street with a red vest was like a target. When I worked in garages, there's asbestos and TCE everywhere. So it's a trade-off,
All right, I have a couple questions on what you just said. When you said that when you have a bad day, you still go home and have a good time. How do you do that? How do you make that transition from, how do you leave, you said like going home and thinking like a lawyer, that you can't do that. How do you make that transition? Is there like something physical
I'm a
or
music
spiritual?
person. I mean, I don't have any musical talent, but I could do this radio show and play music, and I'm really interested in music, and my brain is just a series of different songs from all over the world, and so after work I'll usually listen to a song on the way home, or when I get home maybe listen to a song. Another thing that I do is I forget who taught me this a long time ago, that you can incorporate in your life. Like I do the notes, physical reminders or whatever. When I go home I wash my hands. I come back from court, I wash my hands. I wash my hands and I go like this. I just shake it off, and it's mental. But give somebody a hug, and it kind of takes the stress out of your grimace. There's ways. Go home and have a glass of wine doesn't hurt either.
Are you ever scared? I'm gonna do a couple of random questions
Please.
now. Are you ever scared of your clients?
Scared. Yeah. I mean, it's a weird feeling. It's a hard question for me to answer because I think I grew up with little man syndrome. I kind of always been like a skinny guy who a little more aggressive than I ought to be, and so I don't manifest fear very well. I had some meth dealing clients who drove by my house twice with a machine gun pointed out the window, and that was scary. If it happened now, I would be much more scared than I was then, because I'm less of that kind of like little big man than I used to be. Much more interested in staying alive, and much less confident in my ability to take care of whatever comes up. So, that incident was very scary. There's a different kind of fear that is probably a lot less what you're talking about, but a lot more what I think might be a job hazard. A lot of my clients would play both sides and try to set up a lawyer, wear a wire in the office, come in, say something stupid, try to get the lawyer to say something stupid, and then turn it over to the FBI or DEA.
Like what do you mean? Like what kind of thing? You mean like?
Everybody who's in trouble usually gets the offer to cooperate. Who can you give us, and we'll take care of you. That's one of the primary tools of law enforcement in this country is informants and squeezing people who are under the pressure of these big sentences that they could get. So you take a heretofore successful cocaine dealer and arrest them and tell them realistically you're looking at 20 to 40 years, or you can help us out, give us somebody big. And which comes first? Does the DEA say, can you give us a lawyer? Any dirty lawyers? But they're out there. That's a reality. It's happened to a couple of my associates. One day I had a phone call. The guy, the lawyer says, Joel, I just want to let you know right now your name's coming up in these wiretaps. I was like, God, I didn't sleep for a week. And then I find out it's this guy who happened to be a drug dealer who kept calling me to ask me about my sister who's a dog trainer. Well, cool, but that kind of fear can affect your job. Recently there was a federal indictment where they went out and they raided this lawyer's office, and apparently the probable cause was he associates with criminals. Well, he's a criminal defense attorney. They threw out all the charges after 3 months, but not after he was arrested in sight of his wife and kids. He works at home. Not after they seized all his computers, including his kids with the Nintendo games on it, and not after a lot of public humility. Did it turn out that a snitch had said some things about him that they had no basis. But those little kind of like things that could lead you to being paranoid, and so I joke about it, when people say something like, when a guy says to me one day, I'm in here and I'm behind the bars and you're not, and right down the street there's this can that has $150,000 buried in it, and 50-50, what do you say? And it's just like, ha ha ha, funniest thing I ever heard, because to me it is funny in a pathetic way. You're in here and your money's out there. There's a hotel built on it right now at Albanon and Speedway, unless one of the guys working construction got rich, but my natural assumption is you're setting me up, and I don't want to be there. So that's a kind of fear that I have to guard against, because you might call it paranoia, right? I mean, is this real on a daily basis or not? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not.
That must be really hard, because you're working with your client, and yet you're fearful of your client, that there's this sort of double bind of you just have to be careful. There's not a...
If you don't spit on the sidewalk, you're not going to get arrested for it. Before I became a lawyer, I was able to have cocktails and drive home. I don't now. My limit is 1, and I have too much to lose. Before I became a lawyer, I remember talking to real estate people about shady deals. I don't have that conversation anymore. It's not academic. There's no such thing as a joke on tape. And so I don't, that's what I'm trying to say is like, it's not a fear. I'm not going to jail. But it's something that like invades like a constant apprehension, what's really going on here. Nobody ever tells me the truth, I had a guy flown out from Washington, D.C., DOJ's top polygraph examiner, who lied to me. So the client failed the polygraph. And I walked back in that room and told my guy, for God's sakes now, you're going to go straight to jail. It's going to be a long time. You better turn around and start cooperating with these guys right now, you know? And then I found out a week later I had been tricked. Like, really? Well, you would lie to me like that? Hey, it's business. So, you know, what are you going to do? I don't know. That's just where I work. I mean, I prefer it to, you know, I used to try to sell houses, and kind of hated telling people, you know, this house is perfect for you. How arrogant. I know just what you're looking for. I can take care of you. How deceptive, you know? That's what sales is, and I think there's some sales in lawyering, but in my job, I have the beauty, the freedom as a public defender to tell the truth, you know? I mean, it's funny all the time. I got like people that go like, well, I talked to this other lawyer and he said he could do something for me. Of course, dude. If you walk into my office and I tell you I can't do anything for you, are you going to pay me anything? Well, I don't want to be in that position. I think all the time about being a private lawyer, and someday I would like to do that. I call it like, instead of like retiring, maybe someday I could just do sport law. You know, maybe I could do what I want. You know, and but in the meantime, my client comes in and things are looking bad. I tell him, this is it. You're going down. Okay. Now let's work on damages. Let's try to cut your losses. And I think a lot of other lawyers don't have that freedom, you know, because they need to convince the guy that, yeah, we're going to do everything we can to get these charges dismissed. If it's not happening, I'd rather just tell him. You know? I'd rather just tell him.
We're running out of time, and I have at least one more question for you. Hold on. They're early. Billable hours. Let me just hold on. Let me just go tell them.
Yeah.
Right. So.
I mean, I keep track of my hours because the court's required.
Stop. We are starting to get construed again. Okay.
Right.
We ask everybody about billable hours. So, do you have billable hours, or how does it work? And also, if you don't, how much time do you get to do? Do you get to choose how much time you have with people?
It's another great thing about my job as a public defender is that it is tough enough of a job that I believe other offices would be similar to mine. There's very little oversight, very little. You know, if I want somebody else's opinion on how I'm doing my job, I have to beg for it. And so I end up with cases where I just put really inordinate amounts of time into things because I want to fight this, you know, or the person really wants to fight it. And that's a great benefit to my job. I mean, I look at the prosecutors and I'm like, you know, can we remove the redundant phrase in this paragraph? Well, I have to check with my my three supervisors and get a letter from Washington. It's amazing, man. I mean, the rules that people have to deal with. And in my office, it's kind of like, boss, would I be breaking any rules if I did this? And I was kind of like, well, I don't know, Joel. What do you think? You know, and I love that. You know?
So no billable hours. You don't have to worry about that.
I keep track, and it's a new, you know, just new thing that came down from the federal government. Is like, you know, everybody's going to keep track of their hours to see if you're efficient or if you're not efficient. And so we do it. And then there's also kind of this monetary theme going in the courts where they're going to, like, if somebody gets out of jail and they win the lottery, they're going to like bill them for the hours that I put in or whatever. And it's kind of goofy because at times I have to kind of make the hours up. You know, if you drive to prison to see 3 people, somebody gets the drive time and 2 others don't. Well, so at the end of the case, the hours that are actually recorded on that are, you know, a guesstimate. But we keep track of it.
What about in corporate law, billable hours, all that stuff? It makes a difference in terms of how you're promoted and all that stuff. If you don't have that, what are the sort of status or the rewards of like is there like moving up or your salary increases, or is it all sort of set?
In governmental work, there's always going to be some kind of review process. Ours is fairly mellow, and there's also some kind of grade step increases, which ours is kind of good. I mean, that's the good part about being a federal defender as opposed to a state defender, because the salaries are really different. And I think that, you know, they look at how many cases we do, how many times we go to trial, how many times we file motions. You know, supervisors will look at your motions, you know, what substantive motions have you filed, and briefs, how many appeals. And I don't think they're really looking at your win-loss record, but those are the criteria.
Is that driving any of your behavior, the reviews, or are you just doing your job and not worrying about the reviews?
I have, I mean, I think everybody wants to be regarded well in their profession, and I do. I mean, that's one of the reasons I started right after law school. There was a little brief stint with a private law firm in which I would have been making a lot more money. In fact, I went from $30 an hour down to like 12 when I went to the federal defender. And that, you know, it's kind of like long since gone, but I don't know. I don't know if I can really answer the question. You know, it's because it's all relative to everybody's.
Anything else before we end? Any advice or thoughts? Or sometimes we ask people what their happiest moment is. I don't know. Do you have any happy moments or?
Happy moments? Oh yeah. 2 years ago, I had the most extreme prosecutorial judge in federal court throw out a case for a client who was actually innocent, and this kid was extremely grateful. His mom, you know, came into my office tearfully. I mean, those little moments every once in a while, you have them, and Nathan, you know, he deserved it so much that, guys, you can ride that for a long time. I saved his life, you know, I really did, and he knew it, and he married his girlfriend. They moved to Pittsburgh, and 2 years later, he came by my office and dropped off some little memento to let me know that he's an aspiring rock and roll musician, and I feel like a proud father when that happens. That's super, you know. You know, I've won a couple of appeals in the Ninth Circuit, and one of them was a fairly significant point of law, and you start getting emails from around the country. It was like, Mr. Parris, I'd like to ask you about this issue. And I'm going, I don't know nothing about that. And they're like, oh no, we know, we've read your case. And I'm like, you know, you gotta love that. You gotta love it. I wrote some little article on border search law, and it gets published, and the next thing you know, you're getting phone calls from people around. They go, oh, I've got this guy, a Nigerian, he came to this airport, you can search him. I'm like, I'm not an expert, you know, but you'll get strokes as a lawyer. Everybody will, and I just think it's great. You know, sometimes really good things happen for good people, and it's too bad it's not more often. But you know, but they're sure sweet moments. You know, they're really sweet moments.
Well, this has been terrific. This has been great. Anything else? Are you we're done?
Oh, I think I do have you know, a couple of recommendations for people that, you know, I mean, like it's a cop out to say I work for what I believe in, you know, because sooner or later you got to take care of yourself. It's also really just empty to work for money, so you got to balance those two. And I think that, you know, you get out of school, you got a certain pressure to get a job if you have student loans, for example, and you need that job. So that first job, you're probably going to stick there for a little while. You don't want to walk away from it in 3 months. So it's important to have a good first job. And I think that that's why you got to do some homework when you're third year. And here's my strategy. Call lawyers out of the blue and say, I'm a law student. I really like to buy you lunch and pry your brain. Because by the time you're having lunch, they're not going to let you pay. They'll take care of you. They'll tell you some things. And you can do that 50 times in your third year of law school and really get a lot of information. And it's not like an internship, but you'll meet people, you know. And I still meet people on the streets that are some, you know, civil lawyer that I had lunch with, and now I go like, you know, I owe you lunch, and it's just it's a good sociable way to get information, and you don't have to like be knocking on doors and waiting in lobbies and stuff like that. You know. which is how I was when I got my job. I was, it was an inside job. I went there and they said, we're not hiring, we don't hire new attorneys without without 5 years of trial practice. We don't hire. And from time to time, boss would come out the lobby and he'd say, what are you doing here? I tell you, you don't want to hire. And so like, I'm here in case. I'd just go after school or after work, I'd go over there and hang out. And, I was working for this other law firm and I'd take a lunch break, go over and sit in the lobby. And it was, I guess, relentless. And then finally they, he kept saying, well, we don't have a clerking job, So I found the clerk and I said, look, I'll give you $100 to let me know before you quit. And she says, well, I can't do that. But she took my number and she called me the day before. So there I was in the lobby when the man comes walking through and says, what are you doing here? And I said, because you need a law clerk. And he says, no, we don't. We have a law clerk. I told you that before. 10 minutes later, he came back out in the lobby and he goes, you're pretty persistent. Why don't you come in and talk to me? And because he'd gone in and found out this clerk was resigning and in. So don't take no for an answer if you want something, and ask a lot of questions.
That's a good story.
So,
That's a
it's
great
true.
note to end on.
It's true.
Well, thank you very, very much. This has been great. It's lovely.